welcome to the second event of the Smart City series with Scale San Diego. My name is Daniel Obadovsky, and I'm co-founder of Scale San Diego, along with Wolf Bellis, who is here. Hi, Wolf. Scale stands for Smart Cities Accelerator Labs and Environment, and focused on helping startup companies focused on urban innovation succeed and grow, and scale, as the name suggests. Over the next few weeks, we're going to make some more announcements around the stage the Scale's in, and publish the application form for the Scale Accelerator. And there's a lot more exciting things coming down the pipeline. So basically, for the startups that are going to be joining Scale San Diego, they're going to get a range of services that's going to help them be successful in urban innovation. By the services, we mean mentorship, we mean things like connecting them to potential customers, potential partners, investors, and so on and so on and so on. So if you guys either have your own smart city startup or you know somebody who has, come our way, send them our way. We would love to talk to them. So today we're going to have a very exciting events, and today we're going to talk about smart grids and microgrids and opportunities for entrepreneurs in smart grids. Before I talk a little bit more about the panel, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our sponsors. One of our sponsors and a co-founder of Scale San Diego is Downtown Works. Do you guys like the space? So actually, at the end of the event, Candace is here. She's going to give a tour for anybody who is interested. She's going to give a tour of Downtown Works. All 4 levels. And the roof too? All right, the roof is included too. We have a very cool space on the roof. And especially when the weather is nice, it's a great place. Maybe we'll do a party there someday or do a meet up there. So in addition, we have other sponsors we wanted to thank today for supporting us, and anybody who is interested in becoming sponsors and sponsoring our events and getting access to the crowd in urban innovation, developers, entrepreneurs, engineers, and just a lot of great and creative people, please join us. 10 Barrel Brewings, Carnivore Sandwich, and Baja Fine Wines. Thanks to the sponsors. All right, so now we're coming to the most exciting part of tonight's evening is the panel on smart grids and microgrids. So we have amazing lineup. We have Andreas Roell from Iteros Ventures as the moderator. How many of you know Andreas? Awesome, Andreas. With that, I also want to announce Jennifer from Iteros. Kiva Allgood with G Ventures, ex-Qualcomm. And Adib with Xendee. Welcome, guys. Andreas, how do you say in German, take it away? Auf geht's.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel, for having me to be the moderator of this wonderful panel. And it's actually a great pleasure for me because this is the first time I'm moderating a panel that I actually know everybody. So I'm really happy about that. And some of you are very good friends of mine, so even better. So Andreas Roell, I'm one of the managing partners of Iteros Ventures. We are a venture formation fund here in San Diego. We are just in the midst of ramping up here. So excited to be here because microgrid and smart city is one of the topics that have been coming across our desk quite a bit, more and more. So it feels like San Diego is actually on the cusp of actually taking advantage of these great opportunities. Before we get started, I think it would be probably best for each one of you to introduce yourself and who you're with, what you do, why you're so interested in this topic.
Sure. My name is Jennifer Worrall, and I'm the CEO of Iteros. We build renewable energy management software that helps make renewable energy more reliable and predictable. And I started in this industry because I have a background in utility space, and I found that the existing tools that are out there, they're not designed for renewable energy, and it makes it difficult for us to make this transition to having more renewable energy. And so our platform is all about making that easier and more profitable for our customers.
Good evening. Hopefully everybody has a glass of wine, and we'll ask lots of questions. Kiva, Allgood. I work with GE Ventures, and I actually have the pleasure of standing up businesses within GE. So I harvest ideas either within GE or outside, and we set up companies that really focus on areas that are critical to our business in the future. So I'm going to wait.
It's a
Like
GE
that.
turbine.
That is a GE turbine, a very large one. We make those. As most of you may know, we actually produce about a third of all the energy in the world. So if you think about all of our turbines and all the things that we power, that creates about a third of the energy today. And the goal is to really ensure that that includes renewables in the future. So a lot of our investment and focus is in that space. And as you mentioned, I came from Qualcomm, where I was very focused on smart cities and the distributed energy and grid as well. So happy to be here. Oh, you have one. And I love the fact that there's two ladies on the panel, so I will say that as well.
Good evening. My name is Andreas. I am co-founder of Xendee, a San Diego startup. I got involved in microgrids years ago through my work with the Federal Aviation Administration as the power systems and the centers and the infrastructure was aging and power was being lost and human life and safety was being affected. We didn't call them microgrids back then. We called them critical power systems. And that led to some work with the Navy and also with data centers from Visa and eBay and some of the other organizations that we'd know where if you lose power, it's either a lot of money or human life and safety. And now I'm really excited to be working with the impact of distributed generation with intermittent sources like solar and also storage.
Great. So by show of hands, real quick, just want to get a little bit of a scan over the audience here. Who's an entrepreneur? What's that, half? Yeah, good. Who's an investor? Some money, good. Who is a corporate representative? Who's others? Just kidding. All right, so we got a good variety of people here, which is I think the objective for us as a panel as well, that we speak at various levels of technicalities, I guess, with me being probably the least sophisticated when it comes to microgrids amongst the four of you, or us. And so let's start with this simple definition question. What the heck is a microgrid, and how does it work? Jennifer, you want to take it up?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of definitions for microgrids out there, and I think the official one says that it's the ability to be able to both run independently of a grid as well as being able to connect to a grid, so which means that if you're off in a submarine or off on an island, that it's not necessarily a microgrid. I kind of disagree with that sort of concept. But basically, the microgrid being the concept of being able to bring together renewable or traditional uses of power like generators and be able to balance that power amongst the load as well as the resources that are available to you.
I think that was excellent. I grew up on a commune, so for those of you who don't know what that is, so we produced a lot of things, and energy was also one of them. So my dad is a geothermal dude. And from my perspective, I think of it not as micro, but as precision. So if you think about precision medicine for solving a specific ailment or element, I think that the energy sources are going to actually be more precise in the future. And the more we know about them, the more accurate they'll be. A great analogy I like to think about is even San Diego. So if you think about having to turn a peaker plant on, which is not clean and it's also not healthy, we have a port, we have a convention center, and we have a ballpark. If they all were going on at the same time, we would not have enough electricity. So understanding in a precise nature how to schedule those things across each other is, to me, is the initial opportunity, not necessarily a microgrid, but a precision problem. Tell the port that ship can't come in for another 2 hours, and you don't have to turn the peaker plant on because you have the convention going on or Comic-Con. So for me, it's a lot more around understanding kind of how do we manage the resources that we have, whether they're alternative or not. So slightly different definition, but.
So Adib, the concept around microgrids has been becoming more and more popular, probably, in my opinion, over the last 2 years or so, maybe more in your world. What has happened, and why suddenly this entire interest around microgrids?
So there's a few things that have been happening. One is the traditional grid as we know it is old. It's aging. So you can either replace all of that, and it's trillions and trillions of dollars, or you can look at where the weaknesses are and see where you can really help it. And by putting these local energy systems in place, you relieve the pressure off of some of these older systems. So now that wire or that cable doesn't have to carry all that energy because you now have it locally. So that's one component is, our energy system was designed in the 50s and implemented in the 50s. And not much has changed. And a lot of the equipment out there is past its lifespan. And the cost to replace it is just really high. So one is, how do you extend the value of the existing transmission and distribution system? The most economical way is to use distributed generation. The second is the concern around energy security, is how I'll put it. But we have these storms, we have these events, these natural disasters that are occurring more and more frequently. And central power systems go down. How do you provide continuity of power? Again, microgrids. Local energy source that can island itself and operate on its own, or it can interconnect and work with the utility and help the utility out. So when we had the fires, SDG&E needed help. UCSD has a microgrid. Their microgrid took over and started supporting the system. Oh, okay. So that's, wow, okay. So that's one part. Those are the two. And then the third, which is now becoming more and more important, is cybersecurity. You can hack a central power system and take down all of San Diego. Now, if all of us have nanogrids or microgrids, good luck hacking 30,000 or 40,000 power systems. You might get a few of them, but then real quick, the system detects that an attack is happening and isolates it. So there's a security component, a basic infrastructure problem, and then you also have the resiliency with regard to disasters and events that are outside of predictions.
So was it originally initiated, I guess, through the renewable energy effort, or was there another cause that got us into this microgrid discussion?
So as I mentioned, microgrids have been around within the mission critical space. So like all FAA infrastructure, they have microgrids. When we have a weather problem here in San Diego, the Southern California Tracon off Miramar is running as an island. It's not using any power from SDG&E. It uses SDG&E as a backup. Now what has happened though, and the opportunity that renewables bring, is fuel costs, right? Now, for example, let's say you're the Mercado National Science Foundation base in the Antarctic. It costs a lot of money to put diesel fuel and ship it 4 times a year to keep those diesel generators going. But if you can use wind and solar, A, you have extended your ability to run. B, you've minimized those transport costs that are millions of dollars. Now, for the military, forward operating bases, you got to put a power system out in the middle of nowhere, and the country you're in isn't real friendly to you. You don't want to run those trucks and have them hit IEDs to bring fuel to you. So if you're able to use solar, you're able to use wind, and you're able to store it, now you have the ability to operate more efficiently, but at the same time more securely, without putting additional people at harm's way. So renewables bring a lot of additional flexibility that just didn't exist.
Great. Kiva, obviously GE Ventures. GE is, like you mentioned already, behemoth in that space. How far has microgrid been adapted in the commercial, I guess, environment versus the R&D or military environment, as you had already talked about.
Yeah, I think the resilient element is definitely the initial driver. So as mission critical elements, your data center has to stay up. The number of companies that actually use the local power and electric company as backup versus original generation is increasing. So you're also starting to see local storage. I mean, UCSD is a great example of they basically are backup for San Diego based on the amount of energy they produce and store. So from my perspective, it actually started on the enterprise side because it was critical to their ability to sustain their business models, especially if data and data centers was that, how they make money. And I think now it's starting to kind of branch out from there. But I definitely think that consumers are also demanding it. And I think that in certain states, the U.S. is an anomaly, in my opinion. If you look at Germany, for example, they're way ahead because the government said, we will do this, and they are doing it. So if you look at their stats and their numbers and kind of how they're managing it today, despite the fact that their infrastructure is probably, 100 years older even, they have really been able, and Norway's another country that has really been able to kind of drive the type of dynamic change that needs to occur because it's like a state. So I think California is a good example for the U.S., but it's definitely not going to be as pervasive as it is in other countries as quickly, in part just because of regulation and I would say the reliance on capital, the way it currently works within the utilities, and then also on private-public partnerships. So it's hard to get the cash.
So we are seeing adoption. Jennifer, what do you feel are some of the technical, difficulties or challenges that people face when it comes to microgrids?
Well, I mean, I think that we're overcoming those one by one right now, and economics play a big role in that. And so what we're seeing is that there are certain areas, we get the R&D and the military that are doing a lot of that work for us. We also are seeing island nations that have that good case of this very expensive diesel. A lot of these island nations, they don't have the sort of credit rating that allows them to have forward contracts on their diesel, which means that they can buy it a year in advance. They have to go with the market, and so they can be in some pretty rough shape when they try to operate the resources that they need for their country. And so we're slowly overcoming these economics because we do have all these great opportunities where it's very easy to be able to say we're not going to have this human loss of life in a military situation. We're on an island nation where it's 89 cents a kilowatt for to be able to run on diesel generation. So that's one area, and then the other area is really in just the technical aspects of it. That batteries are becoming truly ready for this sort of technology. It used to be that your only
standpoint.
option was
you talk about storage.
Yeah, battery storage. Yeah. So it used to be that generators were the only thing that could really be able to power these sorts of situations, and through the combination of intelligent software plus the solar and the batteries, you can have a comprehensive solution that doesn't even have to include diesel generation anymore.
Just wanted to make one comment on in my view is that if you take the economics out of it, if you think about markets like South Africa and India, they're never going to have true full infrastructure. So if you were, in Texas, there you go, in Texas, unless you get fracking capabilities in your backyard. But I think if you look at those markets, that's where the true disruption is going to happen. That's where you're going to see solar panels that have cellular connectivity, and they pay by the day on their phone because they have no other way of getting electricity today. They're not going to rewire all of that. If you think of Latin America, it takes 5 years to get a traditional phone in your home because the infrastructure is so old. They're not going to go that route. They're going to completely skip forward 10 years, and it's all going to be distributed, and it's all going to be
Just like cell towers.
Exactly, and it's going to be very precision oriented, and it may be municipalities, it may be other people who actually stand up those services because it's the only way that they can drive for innovation. It's the only way that they can sell their goods. It's the only way that they can make money. So, and in some markets, it's going to be the only way that they can get education. So my view on that is that we've only hit the tip of the iceberg. So if you think about the future of work and how people are going to go to work, how they're going to learn, you're going to see that, in my opinion, energy is going to play a big role in that, but it's going to do it in a distributed fashion.
So I'm accelerating or bringing forward a question that I actually had later, but since we have a smart city expert here specifically within you, Kiva, and you're talking about developing countries, what does this mean? What does the future look like for developed municipality like San Diego? I mean, how much are we taking advantage of microgrids here? Will we take advantage of microgrids? What will resource management look like, right, in a developed city like ours?
Well, I think that completely depends on the leadership's ability to kind of push
Sure.
through the politics.
In a perfect world.
In a perfect world. Well, you know, my view has always been that the future of infrastructure is our ability to reimagine its purpose. So a road should no longer be a road. A light post should no longer be a light post. A car should no longer be a car. It should all be multifunctional. So the ability for San Diego, especially, because I am very proud of San Diego, it is we are the mom and dad of the two largest innovation platforms in the world, cellular and genomics, and we don't get enough credit for that. So there we go. And I personally think San Diego has the chance, if we can move past the politics, to really what is the interaction between the people who live here and the city. And if we can actually do that, which is going to start with data science and kind of freeing the data and the democratization of the information.
I'll come back to that.
Yeah. I think we have probably one of the best chances because we do have a forward-thinking mayor, and we've got David Graham and the whole entire team who really understands the space. But to me, it's procurement and politics that typically stand in the way of true innovation. It's not technology. The technology is more than available. And I've challenged the government. I was at an event last week. It's also getting people who are graduating from Stanford and Harvard and all these other amazing places with data science and mathematics degrees to want to come work for a city. So how do you get the brightest people to want to innovate in their hometown? And I think that starts with, why not do something like Teach for America, where you pay for their education to encourage them to work for a city for 4 or 5 years. So until we actually can get the talent focused on reshaping our infrastructure that is so old, I don't know if any city in the U.S. is really going to see that full transformation. But I full-heartedly think San Diego is at the forefront, and they can do it if we can kind of solve some of those other issues.
Wow, that's cool. Adib, what do you think? What's your vision?
Well, I share Kiva's, and borrowing from your telecommunications analogy, I see really, whether it's the developing world or even here in San Diego, California, the United States, we're moving to energy as a service. Let's recall what we had with our phones, the telecommunications. It was a copper wire, and we just made phone calls on it. But now that copper wire, what is it doing? It's giving you cable TV. It's giving you internet. It's giving you, now there's Wi-Fi connected to it. There's a lot of additional services that happen to come over that copper wire that just used to be voice. Now, I would go a bit further and say that voice capability is kind of a lost leader now. And the AT&T that was there 20 years ago isn't the AT&T today. But that bill that was $20 a month now is $180 a month maybe, and nobody's complaining, right? Because you have a lot of more services. You lose your cable modem, and now your Wi-Fi is down, your TV, your smart TV doesn't work, your kids hate you, the Xbox isn't connecting to the live. So energy is the same way, except the energy infrastructure, the distribution system is far more valuable. It has far more valuable assets than that copper wire connection with the PBX boxes that the AT&Ts had. So you have far more valuable infrastructure that can do a lot more, that will bring a lot more capability and services to every single individual, and it's really going to be the building blocks of a smart city. But these assets are in place, and now there's this opportunity through this microgrid technology to deliver services. So energy becomes a service. And as we move towards that, then we go into a whole different level of opportunities within the smart city space and the Internet of Things.
So I think, Kiva, you brought up data a little bit already, obviously at the core of what I do on a day-to-day basis. So Jennifer, I know you're working on a project or your venture in the data play as well. So with all the microgrid, a lot of data is being generated, released, can be utilized. And then, an obvious outcome is resource management, as we brought up before. Tell us a bit about how we need to think about microgrids and data analysis, use of data, all of those?
Absolutely. I mean, it really is all about the data, and this is where the software plays such a key role in making this transition to 100% renewable energy, whether it's within a microgrid or whether it's grid connected. And in order to properly balance, because it's all about balance, and so what you really need to be able to do is you need to have solid predictions. You need to not only understand what your loads are going to do, you want to be able to know how much you're going to be able to produce. And more importantly, when it comes to things like a battery, you know the day that you buy your cell phone battery, that it performs a lot differently than it does on the day 500 that you own the same cell phone. And so what you really need is to be able to understand what's happening with that battery so that you're not just optimizing it when it's in the field, in the situation, in the very heavily controlled scenario that you have in your office building, but you're still optimizing it 10 years down the road when that asset is still in place. And so really it's all about this ability to understand the devices that you have, to understand the world that you're working in, and that scenarios even change, that if you're installing this particular these particular pieces of equipment in a facility that is a manufacturing facility, they may add a new shift. How did that change the load? How do we predict that without having to go in and have expensive changes to controls? And so it's really all about the ability to forecast, and then when things aren't happening according to forecast, recognizing the change and continuing to optimize the system. So, and that really is a strong area of my focus.
Anybody who wants to add? If not, I have a follow-up question, but go ahead.
Data is important, and data is important for other aspects in addition to just how you operate things. It's also really how you participate in a market. Because just like right now, you go buy a solar system from Solar City or whoever, and they might in the future also offer you storage. Well, what if you and your neighbors could get together, aggregate your energy, you're not using it, you're all at the office between 9 to 5 p.m., and peak hours are really from 11 to 6 p.m. on the utility. What if you guys aggregate your overproduction and sell it? You know, or the system comes to you and says, you know, is it okay if we run the dishwasher at 11 o'clock instead of 3 o'clock on this Saturday, and we'll give you $10. So now you actually participate versus just consume, because you're now a producer too. But there needs to be data so that those decisions are being made for you, or a recommendation is being made for you by a level of intelligence, so you're not just looking at a wall of data streams saying, you know, I'm just trying to run my dishwasher, what's going on here? But that's the kind of where the connectivity comes in with all the different consumers of power within your home or building or wherever it may be. And it could even go as far as for the data where you have a solar system at home, and let's say you have an electric car, you're in the office, your solar system is throwing a lot of electricity. What if you get credits for those, and then you can charge your car for free at work? It's just an accounting problem, but it needs the data to flow and the data be there.
Great. Final question to you, Kiva, before we turn it to the audience. So obviously you're on the venture side. Could you give us a little bit of an insight in what type of things you look into or you're looking at right now, and where you feel the biggest innovation is going to come from?
Sure. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but you know, from our point of view, insight is only as good as the output of the control, and that actually in the industrial space is probably the biggest hurdle, is that last 50 feet. Because people aren't going to rip out all their equipment. They're not going to, you know, put in new equipment for quite some time. So how do you ensure that you actually get that data? And a lot of that also comes down to interoperability. So I recently read a report, I think by McKinsey, that stated 40% of the value in the space is lost because of the lack of interoperability. So you may have a contract with Sunrun, but I have a contract with somebody else. So how do you ensure that you have that level of interoperability? So we are focused on really trying to understand what are some of those digital threads that really go across, regardless of whether you're talking oil and gas, whether you're talking distributed energy or wind, that pull that information together in a meaningful and insightful way that protects the people that provide it and that also ensures that it's secure. So those are lots of words, but I think really trying to figure out interoperability, security, I would say AI and analytics to an extent, but I think that those, I mean, who went to CES this year? That was the buzzword, right? AI. Everything was AI. There's a skateboard that had artificial intelligence on it, which was really impressive, actually. But I think, if you think about, erase the buzzwords and think, how do people really do their job today? Where we're focused is on that future of work. So how do you ensure that there's not a lot of people who want to go out in the middle of the ocean and look at a flare stack to see whether or not it's about to, you're laughing, but it's true. So how do we replace that with some of those things, with autonomous equipment, whether that's a drone or a worm or a car? And then also, how do you ensure that you can use intelligence that's based off of a human being training it, but that you don't have to have 5 data scientists sitting on every single oil rig, because that would be very expensive, because they are very expensive, as you know. So I think for us, I would say those are the key themes. But I wouldn't say that's unique or specific to the energy space. I'd say that's, across any industrial environment, is the future of work is going to change, and that work is going to be predicated on our ability to kind of leapfrog with the new technology and change the processes. And it's going to be changing the guy who's been doing the same thing the same way for 55 years, and then the lack of resources or someone's willingness to do that job on a go forward. We have to reinvent how that job is done. So we're looking at tools and techniques that do exactly that.
Great. Actually, I do have one more question to both of you. Since both of you are in an early stage environment, do you feel that the category is receiving enough attention by investors, capital, in relationship to what it sounds obviously the opportunity is?
I think that we can have some more, and I think that if I were to point at this, I would say that there were some failures in the clean tech space that gave a bad name to a lot of investments in this in the area, and I think that we have to step back and look at all the people talking and see who's really doing those things and invest in those, because there's a lot of opportunities. I mean, The Economist just put an article out a couple of weeks ago that talked about how if we keep adding renewables like this, people are going to stop investing in renewable energy if we can't balance out the energy and make our system support it. And so I think that there's a ton of opportunities. We don't want to see renewable energy fail, and it's a great place for investors to start putting their money, because things are going to change. We have all these renewable goals, whether it's here in the United States or around the world, and so the market is absolutely there. It's just a matter of getting companies like Iteros and Xendee and all the other clean tech startups we have here in San Diego ready and launched.
Right. Adib?
So I agree with Jennifer with regard to the clean tech space and kind of what the effect that has had on the investor community. I do think there is more interest, and I think there is capital to be deployed to really support technologies and startups in this space. The timing is really important. So a lot of people got in early, but this market, typically because it's just a conservative market, especially when you're dealing with utilities, they move fairly slowly. But now that microgrids and distributed energy resources and the R&D projects have really shown the value of the technology, and the military is a real big supporter of this, the change is going to happen much faster. It's going to be like what happened with voice over IP and what happened to the standard copper wire. It's going to happen. It's going to happen much faster, and we're talking 2 to 5 years now. We're not talking decades like what the conversation was just not too long ago. At the same time, institutional investors are still staying away. They're more comfortable with just solar systems because power purchase agreements are understood. You have a customer load attached to it, AAA rated load. Who in their house isn't going to pay their electric bill? Right? So the risk factor is a lot less when the system is really simple. The challenge with microgrids is you're throwing a few more technologies into it, like storage, maybe a generator, and then there's this controller that has to come in, and these financiers, they freak out over that stuff because they really don't understand it, and there's no streamlined process they can go through what's called a bankability audit. And it costs the same to finance and do all the legal work and accounting work to do a small system than it does a big system. And when there isn't a streamlined process, there's no opportunity to create an asset pool. So you do like 30 projects, you bring them all as a single asset pool to an investor like a Bank of America or something and say, hey, let's do this. And then they can actually go through the audit process and say, okay, this thing's going to make this much return over the next 15 years. There's these tax credits, fine. But now you got an asset pool, that's worth $30, $40 million, still going to have the same legal fee. So now your numbers look a lot better. So until we get that streamlined process in place and the bankability, I think the market's still going to kind of be these onesie twosies.
Okay, enough of my questions here for a while. I want to hand it over to you. We got a microphone. So if anybody has any questions. Great, all the way in the back, I knew it. All right, halfway.
Hello. Yeah, I have a comment, an insight, and a question. The comment is we've all heard of B2C, we've all heard of B2B, but something I recently learned was B2G, business to government. I'm a San Diego guy. I'm recently moved over to Arizona, but I'm coming back home. And anyways, I learned that over there. The insight coming from here, going over there, you see things kind of like when you have a young relative that you haven't seen for a long time, you notice how much they've grown. Going over there, it's hard to believe this, Arizona, heat, air conditioning, they do not have the solar that we have, percentage-wise. I think it's a cultural thing, I don't know. So that's the insight. The question is, and this question comes from talking to somebody who tried to sell me while I was in an Airbnb, solar. I asked, why is this happening? And he said, well, the government is the public utilities are interfering with this. They're making it hard for it to be profitable to have a solar system. If I recall correctly, he said you can't sell your electricity back, so it's not really worth it. So the question is, how do you, maybe more people like you than individuals, but how do we influence public utilities or quasi-government entities to basically do this? Because I mean, this is an enormous market that's missing out, and it's because of somebody who's probably scared because they're going to lose profit.
I have a mic, but I'll let one of you guys answer that question.
So I was in Arizona last week at Arizona State University, and they have a microgrid boot camp that's actually funded by the Office of Naval Research, and they train all the veterans on how to design these systems, install, operate, and maintain them. The utility, as you mentioned, is scared. All utilities are. These are monopolies that have been operating in a very known environment, a known set of inputs, and a known set of financial outputs. Guaranteed 10% profit every year. Ratepayers, every asset they put in, guaranteed 10%. But microgrids and distributed energy resources are an existential threat to them. Every single one of us that puts a solar or storage system or anything is basically competing with them. And you really can't stop it. So yes, they're putting in these roadblocks, but at the same time, the utilities also are starting to think about they themselves becoming microgrid builders and developers and operators. Because it is their distribution system. So just as AT&T handles still a lot of the communications and they control your modem at your house and everything, the utilities can play this role too. But they're not designed culturally, I believe, to compete in a competitive market. Because it's been a monopoly. And now all of a sudden, so PG&E can't come and compete with SDG&E, and Southern California Edison can't go and compete with Los Angeles Water and Power. But every single one of us, every building, commercial building, there's nothing preventing us from putting in our own generation, right? Now, there are interconnection concerns and permitting and all that, but every single one of these systems that comes online is basically a divorce that's happening, right? That's how they see it. You're divorcing them, and that scares them. And that's what you're dealing with in Arizona, unfortunately. But I don't think it's going to, so you should go voice your opinion and be present at the meetings, but they're just trying to slow down the process so that they can figure it out. And I don't know if organizations that have had a secure monopoly are able to really move culturally that way.
You know, and I would just add, I mean, I don't think this is going to happen like right around the corner, but I do think that the removal of net metering, because it will happen. I mean, net metering is basically the idea that you can use the grid as your battery storage. So during the day, you're producing a lot of energy, but you're at work. You're pushing that power back into the grid, and then you ask for power back at night. And typically, that power is not going to be as clean. And so we use this net metering now to help encourage the investment into solar energy. It is a way of increasing our ability to have more of this renewable energy right now. But as those get phased out, and they will, and that'll happen not just in places like Arizona, but I think it'll happen here in California as well. I mean, we're going to see this phasing out of net metering. And the great thing is that the costs of solar have just absolutely plummeted. The cost of storage has decreased tremendously over the last 10 years. I mean, it's a small percentage of what it was 10 years ago. And if this trend continues, that by the time net metering goes away, battery storage is going to become a lot more of a reality even in the home space. And so we don't care if it doesn't matter if we can't use the grid as our battery storage right now. We don't have to use the grid anymore. 5 years from now, you're going to have a battery in your house, and you're going to be able to balance all of your load locally. The utilities are going to see that as a threat, and what they really need to be thinking about is their role as the transport in all of this. And so as we move towards those more market principles, that everyone is a generator, the utility gets paid for the transport of power between all of these households that are aggregating their power and moving their power around, and that will be their income in the future.
Yeah, I also think that if you look at what New York has done in Vermont and some of the other markets where they actually are incentivizing and putting a lot of money, billions of dollars, into trying to figure it out, I think you'll start to see more and more incentives. But, it is, U.S. is, every state is different, and the process is different in every state, which also, when I talked about interoperability, it's also interoperability and discussion across the utilities themselves, and that drives a lot of the fragmentation we see in the U.S. And other markets such as Singapore, China, most European countries, you don't have that same issue. So I think, we're obviously living in it right now, but I think that we'll be able to look to other markets for best in class. As I mentioned earlier, it's not a technical thing. It's not technology that's standing in the way. It's people and process. And a lot of times those are harder to change than to get the technology adopted. So, but I think there are shining stars in the U.S. as well, and I think we just have to advocate for those and really, as you said, show up to the meetings, make sure you're pointing those out, and that you're being heard.
Thanks. Jennifer, you had briefly mentioned the Economist article a couple weeks ago. Now, historically, microgrids have been dominated by international markets and military, but really very little commercial and industrial and consumer space here domestically in the United States. What are the market trends that need to happen or need to continue to happen to start seeing microgrids as more relevant for C&I customers?
I think that the loss of net metering is a big one, not being able to use the grid as a storage device. But what you really see is this move towards island nations is big. But as we increase our renewable penetration here in the United States, it's just going to keep getting more and more expensive. Because what happens is that you keep introducing all these this renewable energy, and you're removing people from the grid. But the grid has to be able to stay reliable, and so they've got to add in new storage, new T&D deferrals, all these things that the grid has to do to be able to keep up the reliability for everyone else. And it makes the prices more expensive. They get more defectors. And it's an absolute death spiral. So as we see more and more investment into renewable energy, you're gonna start seeing people defect completely. That, as they say, if you want to be able to use the grid as your storage device, then you're gonna have to pay this fee if you've got solar, or you're gonna have to pay these large standby fees and things like that. This is part of the utility trying to regain that business that they've lost. And so as we continue to have more and more increase in renewables, microgrids are going to follow. The economics are going to follow it, where the price of being able to connect to the grids is going to be so much that you're going to want to be able to use the grid only as an absolute backup.
I kind of look at it as a lot of the C&I customers already do their own generation and production. It's the cost, the high cost of keeping that connection to the traditional provider, just in case something happens. The amount of that, I mean, the total cost per kilowatt is astronomical. So I think that dynamic's gonna have to change, not only from a generation but a storage, but then also backup. So how do you rely on your neighbor for backup? So instead of having an agreement with SDG&E that costs you $500,000 a month, just in case something bad happens, can you have that same type of agreement with one of your neighbors? And I think that dialogue and that exchange is going to have to occur. Then the transmission cost, in other words, you're going to have to use somebody else's transmission to be able to broker that. They basically become a broker, and a brokerage fee is a lot different than what they're used to today, and it's definitely not a model that they're going to run to, but I think that's going to have to be a big part of the dynamics there.
Also, I would add that, if you look at it as a real estate play, when you add these capabilities to a building or to a facility or anywhere, it actually increases the value of the building or the infrastructure. It could, so it's not just putting nice amenities inside. Now you have an added value to every single user of that facility, and the value of the real estate automatically goes up when you bring these technologies in. And to Kiva's point, once you get into the peer-to-peer sharing, where you have a building that has a microgrid on it, and let's say nobody's in it on a Saturday, but there's a hospital next door that needs to have 24/7 capability for the operating rooms, you can offer that. And there's no intermediary. There's no other, it's just you directly selling to them. So that's exciting, but at the same time it's scary for the utilities.
There's some really interesting work going in that area, though. I mean, I'm part of the NIST Transactive Energy Challenge from that perspective of being able to really do that on a large scale. And so there's exciting work. It's backed by the government. It's backed by the DOE right now. They're doing some work with Vanderbilt University and Harvard and MIT to be able to balance, to be able to model this and balance it out. And so I do see that direction moving that way of being able to share power in that way. And it really is a great way, because right now what we see is a lot of market volatility, a lot of negative market prices for these really big consumers that they're trying to work directly with the utilities. And so basically what that means is you're over generating and there's no one to offtake that power. You're actually charged to give power to the grid. I mean, you could be charged money to produce power, and that's not a good place to be in. And so
Redundancy or
right.
reliability, then you're also charging them just in case something bad happens.
Exactly. And so what you really need is to be able to move to selling your
But in fairness to the utilities, power used to go from the power plant to the house. And all the systems that they put in and design was designed to manage that, to make sure that you have reliable voltage, frequency, everything that's needed. And that's why we have such good electric power here in the U.S. Now, what's happening is every single one of us is putting in these renewable sources, and now power's going the other way. Well, those controls are now moving a lot more to control voltage and frequency, because sometimes the sun shines and sometimes there's clouds, and so there's all this intermittency, this instability that's being introduced into the circuit that their equipment is having to manage, which means more wear and tear, which means they got to maintain or replace it a lot sooner than they planned. Well, someone's got to pay for it. So that's part of the challenge that the utilities are feeling with is they want to support, and I think they really understand and want to provide options to consumers, but at the same time, all these things are popping up in a very, very random way, and the system was never designed around that. So they have to make investments too, and that has to be recovered somehow.
Right.
I made that comment, so I'll go first. So it's not going to happen in every state. Obviously, as Kiva mentioned, there's a lot going on in New York on the East Coast. So it's kind of East Coast, West Coast, and some of the southern states where there's a lot of wind, that this is happening more rapidly than other places. And also electricity in the U.S. is pretty reliable, right? We flip the switch, it works. So energy as a commodity is pretty reliable here. So that's where the services layers comes in. Now, is it going to take off within 2 to 5 years everywhere? No, but I think California is poised for that to happen. And I think a lot of the states that currently are supporting and have initiatives in place, especially on the coast where they're susceptible to a lot of storm events, where you're dealing with a lot, not just the price of electricity, but how much it costs to lose electricity. How many people die when they don't have access to roads? If you don't have access to your ATM, I was involved in that blackout that happened in New York, and with the financial industry, and really having to rethink energy surety, they called it. 72 hours, and basically civil society starts falling apart. People don't have access to an ATM for 3 days, they go crazy, So there's a cost in that. There's a value in not letting that occur. And whether you're stuck in the elevator, whether traffic accidents are happening because the lights don't work anymore, think about it. When you lose electricity, we go back to the Stone Ages, basically, because we're so dependent on electric power. Will it happen at that pace everywhere? No, but I think it's going to happen once the financial institutions get involved and this entire bankability issue becomes solved, just like it was with solar. Nobody knew how to deal with the thing until the power purchase agreement came out. And then now it's well understood, the financing is there, and once we can have it as an asset, I think it'll take off. We might see it actually take off in the islands nations, like Jennifer was mentioning, or some of the developing world, or some areas within the country where the grid isn't all that strong and reliable. And then it'll grow from there. Remember, voice over IP first started where? Big companies. And then now we all have it in our homes. So it's going to start where it's really the most valuable.
It's already happening for solar and storage, where especially in places where SDG, where you have high demand charges, right? So if you do a PPA and bundle with storage, then the bankability issue goes away because, again, it's a similar PPA structure to solar, right? So you're de-risking it. But my question is, investors and big financial institutions, how would you de-risk the whole industry of smart grid industry? And you're describing transactive energy and how we're going to get to a future where you can sell your neighbor, where there is no market mechanism. Today we have demand charges that are defined, tariffs that are defined. You can, it's very locational. You can find the areas where it makes sense. It could be in New York, it could be SDG&E. But the whole, the utopian future of transactive energy and using AI, and I just had to think about artificial intelligence and the alternative intelligence now we have in the White House and the fossil fuel hijacking of that place. So do you think we're going to get there now that there isn't any friendly leader to this concept?
Well, microgrids are fuel and technology agnostic. So it could be gas, diesel, solar, wind, right? It's basically just a personal energy system that's sitting near you versus being far away. How that energy is being produced depends on what is the cheapest way to make it where you are and what is the most reliable way. Now, what is going to get it to the next step? A lot of the costs are what are called soft costs, the engineering costs. There's this joke in the industry. You've seen one microgrid, well, you've seen one microgrid. Because they're all custom systems, right? There is no commonality. Even the solar, somebody comes, they want to come look at your house, and they want to do a whole, you need this, Is that how we buy things? So they got to be productized. Just like you want to go buy a laptop, right? What size screen do you want? What are you going to use it for? Gaming, office, whatever. Once you productize it, then you have move the risk to the factory floor versus during installation and integration, which is where it's at right now, which is why it's so expensive to even find customers. Customer acquisition costs are just crazy, right? Because every single one is a custom approach. But the industry is moving towards making these products. So they're packaged systems that you can customize them certain ways, and then once that's in place, now those soft costs, the engineering costs, are out. You spend it once, and you have a set of products that you can sell. And then to the interoperability, once you productize them, then you can also standardize how everything works and talks with each other. So now you can go and say, well, this is the size I need with these options of technologies, just like you pick a laptop or you pick a phone with the options you want. And that's what really at the end of the day has to happen versus some sales guy telling you what you need, which is what it is right now.
How do you solve your neighbor policy?
That
When I was a solar person, when I first started solar, we had that army of policy folks that made solar legal in every state.
right.
Right? That's what it was. The joke is basically trying to make solar legal to allow for catering and power grid agreement and the commercial. But what are we doing as far as the smart grid industry to make all these smart technologies legal?
I think that that's going to happen pretty naturally, but I think it's going to take some time. That I don't see transactive energy happening 10 years minimum, maybe 20. I think that we're early on in the stage right now where we're doing this type of research to get us there. But what you are seeing is the move in that direction. And what I would say is the idea of this virtual power plant, of the ability to have community scale solar and battery resources, the community balancing of load, and balancing on a more community scale before we bring this down more locally. And we're going to see that in areas like California, Texas, Hawaii, all of which have the most market volatility issues for various reasons because of this massive influx of renewable energy. You're going to have to start moving towards the virtual power plant. And the virtual power plant needs transactive energy to run. Otherwise, you're going to be programming every single thing individually. You got to use market principles to do that. And so I would say, solar plus storage and microgrids for critical situations, that's stage one. Stage two, virtual power plants. And then we can start talking about about this whole transactive energy for all.
Yeah, I would say it's 10 years, and I would say it's going to start with C&I, in part because they have more incentive to do so, and they also have more influence on the people that you were just talking about. So I firmly believe that the market's going to start with the large corporations sharing their ability to generate, and that's going to drive a lot of the transactional capabilities. But I also think there's still a really big role for someone to be the clearinghouse for all of that in a very neutral way. The same way, if you think about the financial systems, my first job out of college was to stand up a online banking system, and point blank, my boss told me no one was ever going to bank online. So it was a waste of my time. And I said, I think this sounds like fun. So I did it. And luckily, I got to do some really cool stuff because no one else wanted to work on it. But that clearinghouse concept is gonna happen, and that's gonna happen first, and that's gonna drive it through. I mean, obviously in California we have, call it a duck, call whatever type of curve you'd like. We are producing more than we can consume, and that gets lots of great verbiage, but the reality is it doesn't change the market and it doesn't change the dynamics, and it's going to take people who, a city, 30% of all of their energy every single year is used to clean the water. So there's a really strong correlation between energy usage in a city, same way that it is in the government, and I think they'll also have to figure that out in short order as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. What do you guys think? You want to close out?
Thanks a lot, guys. It was awesome discussion. Thank you very much for participating. Adib, Kiva, Jennifer, thank you very much. Thanks, Andreas, for moderating. Awesome job. We're going to wrap up the event today. Please feel free to hang out and meet some people you haven't met. Basically, want to tell you, if you guys want to have a tour of Downtown Works, Ken is going to take you on a tour and show you things around here. Also, please sign up for our events. Please join a meetup group. Follow us on Facebook. And come tomorrow. We're going to have more events down the pipeline. And, of course, urban innovation. Bring the urban innovation ideas and bring urban innovation startups to us. Thanks a lot, guys, for attending, and look forward to seeing you soon.